What's up, everybody? I'm Renee Montgomery, and I'm excited to share with you the upcoming Fall 2021 Anti-Racism Virtual Summit with SW Helper, the Council on Social Work Education, and Sacred Heart University. Now, during this summit, there will be a lot of dope things happening. There will be personal testimonies from people like Kenny Walden and other things going on. So you guys check it out. It's virtual, tap in. So much work, good work being done in the community. And speaking of that, my foundation, which is called RMF, the Renee Montgomery Foundation, we have local pickup runs for women that we track their health stats and their game stats. We have events all the way from coding camp to career days because the goal is to always educate. And we like to have fun while doing it. You can follow our journey on @RMF Nonprofit on all socials. But again, check out that 2021 Anti-Racism Virtual Summit with SW Helper. Tap in, you guys. Let's go!
Welcome, everybody. I'm back again, but this time I am only here to introduce Mr. Kenny Walden. Hi, Kenny.
Hey, Deanna. Thank you for having me on.
This is my God. Look, it's my pleasure. Guys, I first learned about Kenny. Kenny showed up in my Twitter feed, and I heard him give his personal testimony about how and why he was getting politically engaged. And it brought me to tears. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, I just wanted to say hi. I just wanted to say I heard your story. And, that's how it started. And then when we were putting together the summit and I was thinking about who can I ask that can share their story, not only share their story of how they've been impacted, but share a story of what they did and how they use that as energy to impact and influence the community around them. And my first thought was, let me reach out to Kenny and see if he'd be willing to speak. And he said yes. So thank you, Kenny.
Thank you again for having me. And I'm so glad that you brought something up in your last talk when it comes to incrementalism and stuff like that. Because I think when it comes to being civically engaged, I think a lot of us forget that it does take incrementalism in order to move the ball forward. And a lot of people have the wrong expectations when it comes to our politics, when it comes to holding politicians accountable. When we have the wrong expectations, it can stop people from wanting to be involved.
At all, yeah. Like if you don't get it all right now, then it's like, well, what's the point? Why try?
Exactly.
And I saw that happen a lot in those last 2 election cycles.
It does. And the problem with it is when you play that, all or nothing game, you wind up ending up with nothing. Kind of like what happened with us in 2016, like you said. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that you guys brought up incrementalism because it is important to talk about, especially when it comes to civics and political engagement.
And you see that, with just the work that you've been doing. And I'm going to let you get into, because I know you have a whole presentation to talk about all the work that you've been doing and the incrementalism and how you've been building on it and how you've been building your platform, how you've been building your following, and then how every time you keep building, you always find a way to influence and impact. And you're not just using that influence to sell shoes or sell something. You're using that influence to say, hey, register to vote. Hey, here's what's going on with this policy. I mean, I'm not, that's not going to be an interview, but I am just so curious, what made you decide that this is how I'm going to use my power. This is how I'm going to use my influence. This is how I'm going to use my platform.
Well, what made me decide about it is, honestly, my first initial, and I'll talk about that when I go into the spiel, but when it comes to my influence, I found out that through my activism for my advocacy for then Senator Kamala Harris as she was running for president, that a lot of people relate to me, unlike they relate to a lot of social media pundits or these blue checks, if you will. Because I'm just a regular schmegular person, and people can relate to that. People can relate to my struggle. People can relate to the things that I've gone through, my experiences. And it's so real, and it's so raw, and it's so uncut, which is why my name is Too Raw, Too Real. And people like that because I don't try to talk over people's head. I try to dumb things down or just basically do a kitchen table talk. They feel like they're talking to a friend or they're talking to somebody they've known all their lives. And I had no idea that I had this ability to connect to people via social media. And through those connections, I decided, you know what? I'm going to do this all the time. I'm going to stay politically involved, and I'm going to make sure that I'm engaging with the public, feeding them the right information, providing sources, cited pages, and all the information that they need in order to not be deterred from not being civically engaged. So that was my whole reason. I don't want people to feel powerless. I want to make sure that I empower people, and I'm going to use my platform to do so.
Well, thank you, Kenny, for using your platform to do just that. So now I want you, and I'm going to get out of your way. I want you to just, be you and share your story and your journey and how you're using and continue to use your platform to impact change. So thank you again, and I am going to give the floor to you.
Thank you so much. So, hello, everybody. My name is Kenny, better known as Too Raw, Too Real on all platforms. So if you like what I'm about to say, make sure you hit that follow button on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm everywhere, okay? I'm literally everywhere. So today I want to talk to you guys about the importance of being civically engaged and how it affects our daily lives. Because I know a lot of people are sitting here thinking, oh my God, why should I get politically involved? What's the purpose? There's no purpose. There's not going to be any change that affects me. Well, let me tell you something. When you choose to not be civically engaged, you're choosing to allow other people to make decisions over your life for you. So it's important to make sure that we're paying attention to everything that's happening, not basically just on the federal level, but also on local levels as well. And throughout this, I'm going to tell you my own personal testimony on how politics and policy can affect people just like me and my own personal struggles. But hopefully at the end of this, you guys will learn how to get involved. Hopefully by the end of this, you guys will learn how to feel empowered, not powerless. And hopefully by the end of this, you guys will understand and be able to identify social media misinformation and detractors and deterrents to stop you from being politically engaged. Because right now, we do not have the time to be complacent. And we must pay attention and stay vigilant in what's going on right now as it pertains to our politics and our civic engagement. So let's start off strong. The first thing I want to talk about is my own personal story. Well, what motivated me to decide that I'm going to get politically involved? What made me believe that I had a voice or I could use a platform and turn my advocacy into action and turn my advocacy into activism? Well, my first reason of why I decided to jump in is because of Vice President, or then Senator Kamala Harris. There was a few policies that she was talking about that truly affected my life as it pertains to poverty. And I'm going to basically go over that in a few minutes, but it was certain things like the LIFT Act, the Rent Relief Act, the credit reporting, and maternal health. And then all these basic deterrents like misinformation that was trying to play into the divisive rhetoric to try to feed off of people of color not knowing the roles of politics or not knowing the roles of our government to try to stop them from voting. So let's start off with the policy aspect of it. So the real reason what pulled me or drawed me into the political sphere, because I told myself back in 2016, I'm done. I'm not getting involved anymore. There's nothing that I can do. Well, luckily I was wrong. The first policy that really drew me into the 2019 primaries was the LIFT Act. The LIFT Act is literally a $6,000 tax credit for the middle class that's collectible up to $250 to $500 a month for individuals making less than $100,000 a year. I don't know if you can tell just by looking, but I don't make 100,000 a year. I'm nowhere near it. Okay, I'm literally robbing Peter to pay Paul. Every day is a struggle. I'm basically living from paycheck to Sunday, not paycheck to paycheck. And throughout this policy, I knew personally that this was going to affect my personal life. Um, Back in 2016, I literally had to pack up all of my bags and I had to basically move back home with my mom because things were getting a little too rough for me. I was already working 2 jobs. I was literally doing 50 hours a week at my full-time job working retail, making a little bit over the minimum wage, which was $7.25. I was making $11.75, and I was also cleaning buildings at 3 o'clock in the morning, all the way up. And I would literally only get about maybe 2 to 3 hours of sleep. And even with me working 2 jobs and busting my butt trying to get these bills paid, it still wasn't enough. Things got so bad for me to where things like an unexpected expense, like my car's alternator going out, I had to use some of my own personal funds to pay to get my car fixed so that I could go back to work just to pay for an apartment that I barely ever saw. When I did all of these things, unfortunately, I was short on the rent. I was short on being able to pay my utilities. So what unfortunately happened, which happens to a lot of people, is I had to unfortunately take out a payday loan in order to pay my bills. Um, and that amount of that payday loan was about like $300. But the amount of interest that was on that payday loan wind up causing me to dig a deeper hole than I already was in. Now, I want a lot of people to understand when it comes to poverty, and a lot of people don't think that, oh, well, that Lyft Act really is going to help people. It's just $200 to $500. $200 to $500 sounds like a million when you don't have it. $200 to $500 sounds like a lot when you're literally struggling just to eat. You barely have any food. You barely have enough just to pay your utilities. But did you know that the average payday loan size is about $375? Imagine what the Lyft Act would do to try to stop people or deter people from going to take out these high interest loans. Literally, the average income for payday loan borrowers is $30,000 annually. Last year alone, I only made $30,000, and I was one of those people who was unfortunately preyed on to take one of these payday loans just to pay for an apartment that unfortunately minimum wage couldn't pay. I couldn't afford it. Now, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau says that 80% of payday loans don't get paid back in 2 weeks. Then the interest rate soars, and the amount that you're owed is almost impossible to pay off. And I know this personally because it was nearly impossible for me to pay off. 7 in 10 of those who literally take out payday loans are basically using those for just utility bills and rent alone. So when Kamala Harris introduced this particular policy as the Lyft Act, it really spoke to me and my own personal struggles. So I knew that this would make a difference, not just only in my life, but others' lives as well. So let's talk about rent, because that's where the situation was. At that time, I literally had to leave my apartment because I couldn't afford it anymore. I was literally sleeping in my car outside a parking lot of Walmart. I stayed there for like 10 days until my 2 week notice was actually up to where I could drive home to my mom's and stay until I can get back on my feet. Now, Kamala Harris had actually created another policy while she was running for president to that 71% of those who literally are in low income thresholds would be able to get rental relief. So if you're literally paying about 30% of your gross income and to rent utilities, you qualify for a tax credit that would help you pay off your rent. Now, based off of what they say in terms of your Federal Housing Association, the good rule of thumb for those who are making money that you are rather pay less than 29% in order to pay your utilities, to pay your rent. That's where you want to be. Unfortunately, for people like me who only made $30,000 last year, the only thing I can afford is $700 rent. My last apartment was literally $1,200, which is literally over 40% of my gross income. Even just last year, I had unfortunately had to have two jobs. I'm still working my main, 40-hour a week job, but now I have to Postmate and Uber Eats food to people just in order just to pay the rent, just in order to keep the lights on. That's not really living if you're having to struggle to just pay your utilities. It's not living at all. So, these particular policies really spoke to me. It really spoke to my own personal struggles. And I knew that if these policies could be passed, that things could be just a slight bit easier for me. Now, let's talk about credit. There's another thing that she introduced back in July 2019. She asked for the amending of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which requires all credit agencies to report payments on rent, cell phone bills, and utilities. If anybody knows about being broke, you know when it comes to if you are in a low income, most likely you have a low credit score. In order to even receive credit, you have to have capital. So if you lack money, you're less likely to have access to a higher credit. Now, anybody knows when you have a bad credit score, in order to even qualify for a credit card, what do they ask of you? They ask you to put down a $300 deposit just to get a credit card that only has a $200 limit. But unfortunately, if you pay over the 30% threshold, it's negatively impacting your credit. You'll get a hit. It's funny that most of people in low income communities are spending most of their money on their utilities, most of their money just enough to just pay rent, just enough to be broke. So, if we're paying our utilities, where they have to run your credit in order for you to qualify for lights like Duke Energy, in order for you to qualify to apply for an apartment, if you're paying your rent on time and you've been paying your rent on time, why are they not reporting the fact that you are actually impacting your credit in a positive way? The only time that they ever report your credit is if your account goes into collections or if you're delinquent on an account. So these particular policies of actually helping would actually increase the credit for low income communities, because most of our money goes into our utilities. There was an estimated of 26 million people who were credit invisible and 19 million people who are said to be unscorable files, according to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So there's a lot of people who aren't showing up when it comes to credit. There's a lot of people showing up that don't have access to credit. So if you lack access to credit, you lack access to wealth. I'm 28 years old and I'm finally getting my credit in order, but my credit is not where it needs to be in order for me to buy a house. So unfortunately, if I don't have a higher credit, it's going to be harder for me to build equity so that way I can have my own home. So that was truly important to me, and it really spoke to my own personal experience on what I wanted in order to build intergenerational wealth for a family that I hope to build. So, the last thing that truly inspired me in terms of policy that kind of drew me into the fray was Kamala Harris's advocacy for Black maternal health. Everybody knows that Black women die due to pregnancy-related causes and issues at 3 times the rate of other women, regardless of income and educational levels, based off of systematic racism in our health industry. My sister has been having fertility issues for the last 9 years. She struggles with ectopic pregnancies where she has had been, administered to the hospital and had to basically have them remove the fetus because the baby had gotten stuck in her fallopian tubes. But it's just more than that. My sister also was a victim of a racist health system. After she had gotten her surgery and after they had removed the fetus, she was complaining about, pain in her uterus. And they said, oh, it's just probably scar tissue. Even though she told them, no, I just don't feel right. Something's not right. They sent her home, only for her to go back to the hospital, finding out that she was hemorrhaging and she was internally bleeding. Because unfortunately, when it comes to Black women and maternal health, they don't really listen or hear us or see us as human when it comes to our medical industry, unfortunately. So my sister was a victim of that. And for those people who don't believe that being civically engaged or any of this stuff matters, I want to tell you guys about something when it comes to maternal health based off of what we're seeing right now that's happening in Texas. Women's rights to choose is on the line. And people who are important, basically on our local government, like your governors who are appointing state Supreme Court justices who are making or choosing what can happen to women's body, basically taking away your rights to choose what's happening in your life and not being able to have an abortion after 6 weeks. This affects you. Don't think that none of this stuff matters. All of this stuff matters when it comes to what's happening on our local levels. The same thing that's happening in Texas as they're trying to strip away marriage equality. Same thing they're doing with maternal health. All of this stuff matters. So I want a lot of you guys to pay attention. Let's go to the next thing. Next slide. I want to talk about what's happening locally. 2019, around the time that I was supporting Vice President then Senator Kamala Harris, there was a case in April of 2019. Ohio state legislators, they introduced a bill called HB 413, which stated, to avoid criminal charges, including murder for abortion, a physician must attempt to reimplant the ectopic pregnancy into the woman's uterus. That's women like my sister. And what's terrible about this is you have state legislators not knowing that ectopic pregnancy and abortion are two different things. The medical definition of abortion is the removal of an embryo or a placenta from the uterus. An ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy that is being stuck in the fallopian tubes. When you have legislators basically trying to hold doctors accountable for not trying to reimplant an ectopic pregnancy into the uterus, it's dangerous. It affects people like my sister. So I want you guys to understand that things that are happening on your local level, you must stay engaged and know who these people that are writing these legislations that are basically having say over what you do and choose not to do with your body. So that's important. So the other reason why I decided that I'm going to jump into politics is because of the amount of misinformation. One thing about me is, especially when it comes to racism, misogyny, and false equivalency, and targeted misinformation, I am not the one to play games with. I do not like when people prey on the ignorance or what they think is the ignorance of voters, not knowing information when it comes to politicians or information when it comes to civics or information and understanding how the government works, to try to prey on people to make them not want to go to the polls. That was one of the main reasons why I decided that I'm going to use my platform, use my voice to speak up and speak out and basically hold not just, the misinformation leaders, but also the people that are writing these false narratives, these people who are literally these pundits, these reporters that's literally blatantly putting out misinformation for clicks and views, for sensationalism rather than journalism. That truly was one of the other reasons why I decided that I'm not going to stand by and allow what happened to Hillary Clinton in 2016 happen to Kamala Harris. Because one thing about me is when I say that I truly support Black women and my job is protect Black women, I truly believe in that. Let's talk about misinformation. Let's talk about Cambridge Analytica for a minute. Well, let's talk about misogyny first. Sorry, I think I messed up on the slide. Sorry about that, y'all. So, when it comes to misogyny, Kamala Harris is no stranger when it comes to misogyny, especially when it comes to politics. Women in politics, they feel like they have to do a little bit more. They have so much more to prove. They got to be 10 times faster, 10 times louder, and work for just half the credit, half of the time. Politico laid out a lot of arguments against Kamala Harris's ability to connect to voters. They said it was her Achilles heel in the presidential campaign. They pretty much said that she was too warm. Unlike when they said, well, Hillary Clinton was too robotic. Anytime she would relate to voters, they would try to use it or spin a story to make it seem like she was some sort of supervillain. Anything that was positive or what you would see as positive from a male candidate, they used it as a negative against Senator Kamala Harris. The same exact thing that they did to Hillary Clinton. Now, when it comes to misinformation, now this is the slide I was trying to be on. When it comes to misinformation in Cambridge Analytica, I want you guys to understand there is a lot of tactics being played, especially when it comes to misinformation and trying to get people to not turn out to the polls. We see it every day. We see it when it comes to these headlines. A lot of people don't read the headlines. A lot of people just read the headline and just keep on pushing it and never read the full article. Unfortunately, a lot of this information that we post and a lot of things that are happening when it comes to our social media, a lot of these things are being targeted to us. Back in 2016, the African American community was targeted by a company called Cambridge Analytica that worked with Donald Trump and his election team. And they pretty much harvested information from Facebook profiles on U.S. voters to try to deter them from voting. They collected data like your characteristics. They knew your gross income. They knew your race. They knew certain things based off. They would make tailor-made ads to try to stop you or deter you from turning out to the polls. And they're doing it right now as we speak. You have places like the Shade Room posting so much misinformation when it comes to what's happening in this administration. You have so many platforms and so many people posting misinformation. And the crazy thing about this stuff is it goes viral based off of the way that Facebook and all these other larger platforms have the algorithm set up. We just learned in the last few weeks, based off of the whistleblower from Facebook, saying that they purposely push certain things through the algorithm that would going to get the most engagement. And what they found out what gets the most engagement is things that outlandish, hateful, racist, misogynist, and just flat out misinformation that would get people to get engaged on all of these things that would ultimately deter people from going to the polls. After the first Democratic debate, Kamala Harris was bombarded with 85% of negative online attacks, calling her a liar, a fraud, a sellout, and basically coming for her blackness or questioning her blackness. What we learned in 2016 is that most of the outlandish things that they used to deter Black people from voting in 2016 had something to do with race. In an interview with The Breakfast Club, Kamala Harris basically laid out what was said to her on the Senate Intelligence Committee, that when it comes to the issue of race, which is important why we're doing this anti-racism summit, when it comes to the issue of race, that is one of the biggest threats to not only our national security, but our democracy as a people. If we do not get a hold to this issue of race, we will continue to get attacked and we will continue to be susceptible to misinformation. Now, Wall Street reported bot-like activity pushed racially divisive content, especially about Harris during the Democratic debate, citing that social media intelligence companies like VineSight, Kamala Harris was literally getting 27% out of all the candidates, negative attacks coming for her race. When I'm telling you about issues on race and why this is important, and the issue on race and why we're doing this anti-racism summit, it's very important. All these things are detractors. All these things can stop Black people from wanting to turn out to vote. And unfortunately, all of this comes from and stems from us not understanding the criminal justice system. A lot of this stems from us not understanding civics, which is why I feel it's important for all of us to understand the basic civics so that we can't be deterred from actually being involved. One of those deterrents was this: Kamala Harris is a cop. Now, I understand that our criminal justice system is very complex, but attorney generals and DAs do not arrest people. They are literally in place to they have over, if you're an attorney general, you have over 44,000 employees, where you have other lower level attorneys who actually prosecute cases. But never in the history of the world has an attorney general knocked on somebody's door and locked someone up. So with the Kamala Harris a cop information that was being spread out and all these memes that were being put out, they pretty much tried to deter Black people from trying to vote for the Black candidate. They use all certain things like viral memes. They use all certain things talking about identity politics, trying to deter Black people from supporting the Black candidate. There was headlines and op-eds without fact-based information. Unfortunately, based off of meme culture and the world that we live in today of people not doing actual research, fiction unfortunately became fact. And that's what made me decide to jump into the fray. So this is where I came in. Too raw, too real to the rescue. I turned my frustration into my motivation. I decided that I'm not going to sit here and allow these people to control the narrative and beat down on a Black woman like they did Hillary Clinton. So I decided to turn on my camera, go through every last case, every last, misinformation blog or misinformation post on Kamala Harris's record. And I decided to go in and expose the truth of what's going on when it comes to our candidates, when it comes to misinformation, when it comes to these targeted attacks on our democracy. So I organized. Within that organization, I met the K-Hive. We created this thing called United for Kamala, where we decided to start debunking misinformation. We spent hours and days and threads and spent, oh my God, it was a lot. But we weren't necessarily alone. We were actually able to build a lot of coalitions with other people, other candidates, like the Pete Buttigieg crowd. We was able to make a lot of inroads. We was able to pull a lot of people to our side, even though we had an influx of attacks and all these things working against us. Within that debunking of misinformation, we had to do extensive research, and I mean real research. We had to look up articles past just the primary. We had to look up the original articles. We had to look up court documents. We had to look up all types of cases in order to figure out what are they saying about Kamala Harris? Is it true? Was she really involved in this case? Did she really lock up parents for truancy? No, none of these things happen. A lot of these things, even when you read the article, they tell you in plain sight that there's no miscellaneous data that proves that this stuff kind of actually happened. It didn't. So when we saw misinformation and we saw viral tweets about then Senator Kamala Harris misleading the public, you know what we decided to do? We decided to do this hashtag misinformation alert, which alerted the K-Hive to go and debunk the misinformation. We provide links, provide sources with real fact-based data to debunk that misinformation. And we still do that to this day. We started taking cues from 2016 Bernie Bros. You know how when you used to post something, all of a sudden you just get bombarded by a whole bunch of trolls? Unfortunately, we had to use troll culture to our benefit. We started calling out journalists. We started actually basically breaking down and arguing back and forth. And through that arguing of back and forth and that debating online, our movement started growing, our following started growing. A lot of our videos started going viral. Within that viral, we wind up actually becoming influencers, becoming advocates. And through that, we started building a coalition of people who are truly engaged. And still to this day, we still stay engaged. Everybody knows if you ever go live, you do not want to go against the K-Hive. So, December 3rd was probably a really rough day. Kamala Harris wound up dropping out of the race. Even with her dropping out of the race and all the work and efforts of fundraising for Kamala Harris, we didn't give up. We took a page out of the Avengers, okay? We played the end game. We waited, we organized, we stayed communicating. And we had to figure out, well, what can we do to get somebody with these particular types of policies elected into office to where they have a real say on what could happen when it comes to the presidency, what could really happen when it comes to an agenda for the Democratic Party. So we started looking at the Veep stakes. And we knew that through that Veep stakes, we had a chance of actually doing something to influence through our platforms to make Kamala Harris vice president. So what we created was what we call Live with the K-Hive. We decided that we're not going to be powerless. We're going to be empowered. We're going to let our frustration fuel our motivation. So we continue to advocate or organize and advocate and educate. We wind up outraising and outnumbering the competition. When a lot of people thought that Elizabeth Warren was going to be picked, we made it so that we had to advocate on why Black representation was very, very needed, especially when it comes to the second highest level of office, which would be the vice presidency. Through that, we wind up putting out more information. We created a blog where we literally had a panel made up of Reese Colbert, Black Women Views. We had Drew Comments. We had Maya Contreras, who's running for Congress right now, me, myself, and then Sydney A., and then one of the founders or lead organizers of United for Kamala. And what we basically did, we got on camera. We spoke the truth. We debunked misinformation. We talked about agendas. We talked about what Senator Kamala Harris was doing and what she could bring to the ticket. And through all of that advocacy, even though we had an uphill climb to battle, we had an uphill, battle to climb, we wind up winning. We wind up making our voices heard. So what I'm here to tell you guys today is don't believe that you're powerless. Don't believe that your voice doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, if you decide to do something, if you decide to be civically engaged, if you decide to debunk misinformation, if you decide to pay attention to what's happening, not just on your federal level, but on your local level, trust me, things will change for the best. I know a lot of people feel that, it's really hard to move forward as a nation. I know a lot of people feel like politics is very draining, but don't allow all the negativity to stop you from being inactive. You must be active at all times. If we're not active, you will literally allow other people to make decisions over your body, over your voice, and silence you and silence your experiences. Take it from me. Take it from somebody who literally was homeless, living in his car, sleeping outside of a Walmart parking lot. Somebody who literally had to pack up all their bags and start over. Somebody who had to work from the bottom just to get to ends meet. Somebody who literally was living paycheck to paycheck. Take it from somebody who knows about struggle. Take it from somebody who knows when it comes to what's happening right now in the current administration, how people are fighting against trying to get the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation. I live right now where I'm living right now. I live in low income housing. Just last week, we didn't have water because our pressure was too low. We had to literally schedule our showers. Policy, it matters. That infrastructure bill, if it can get passed, will matter, and it will affect people like me who are living under the poverty line. It really will. So I want you guys to really, when you're thinking about advocacy, and I know a lot of you people are social workers here, when you're thinking about it, I want you guys to truly look at people's experiences and know that the things that we go through, you can affect if you choose not to be civically engaged. It's really important right now to pay attention and get involved. And hopefully, by the end of this, or hopefully with me speaking to you guys, hopefully I've given you all the tools you'll need to debunk misinformation. If you see something that's not extremely right or something that just doesn't seem correct, it only takes a quick Google search to find the information. If you're reading a headline of an article, make sure that you read the article, because most articles will tell you if it's an opinion or if they have some sort of fact-based article, fact-based information. Go to PolitiFact, go to factcheck.org. If you have questions about things that's happening right now when it comes to your own race, even if you have a certain policy that you see that's not being advocated in your state, do you not know that you have the ability as a citizen to call your local legislator and tell them to write up a bill? Did you not know that you can send letters to advocate for certain policies that may or may not affect you? All this stuff matters. And right now, we have so many things happening right now to all of us. Right now, the media is not necessarily on our side and not necessarily feeding us the right information. So it is beholden to us as voters to understand the information. It's beholden on us to do the research when these reporters choose not to. A lot of people have a misconception of how the government works and how bills are actually passed and how we can get rid of the filibuster. A lot of people believe that it is up to the president to get rid of the filibuster when it's actually an act of the Senate. A lot of people believe that an executive order is the same as passing a law when it's not. A lot of misinformation is being fed to the Black community as it pertains to this administration's act or inaction on the Black community, when in fact, Joe Biden has already appointed 3 Black women to social circuits and judges. It's already happened. When it comes to criminal justice, when we're fighting to get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed, Joe Biden has already called on the DOJ to end carotid codes and no-knock warrants, the same things that's already in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. When it comes to information about investment of our HBCUs, our historically Black college, Joe Biden has already invested $1.3 billion in the last 9 months into HBCUs, opposed to Donald Trump only investing $250 million. And even with that $250 million, that investment wasn't just an act of Donald Trump. The people who advocated for just that small investment was then Senator Kamala Harris and Doug Jones. So it's important to know this information and know who's advocating for what. It's important to know why. Why are certain things happening? I think what is basically happening is white fear. What's basically happening when it comes to voter turnout is white fear. For the first time in American history, when Cambridge Analytica and misinformation in 2016, they were able to decrease voter turnout to 56.4%, opposed to 2012's 66.6%. And they're purposely targeting African Americans with misinformation because what just happened last fall was not supposed to happen. We turned out at a highest rate in the history of America, thanks to, even during the middle of a pandemic. And I want you guys to understand, they don't want us to show up to the polls. They don't want you to use your vote. They don't want you to use your voice. So it's important to stay civically engaged. It's important to know what's really happening, especially right now when it comes to our government. There's so many things that could happen right now in this administration that could positively affect us. And I know it may not be everything we want, but having something is better than having nothing. So hopefully everybody got a little something out of this talk with me. I hope that you guys are staying vigilant. I hope you guys pay attention. I hope you guys start doing your own research. Don't always just read the title of the article. Make sure that you're reading the entire article. Make sure that you're understanding the roles of government and understand how policies are supposed to get passed. I know a lot of people feel that there's a lot that's riding on Joe Biden, but we have 3 branches of government, you guys. We have a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. All 3 branches matter, including your local and state government. When it comes to legislation being passed, it is literally ultimately up to the Senate and the House to pass the legislation. The president can't override those 2 branches, unfortunately. And those 2 branches have to coincide, meaning if you believe in investing in low-income communities, if you believe in investing in free college tuition, if you believe in giving a tax cut to the low-income communities, if you believe in investing in our infrastructure, if you believe in a good minimum wage, all these things are on the line. If you believe in a woman's rights to choose, if you believe that Black lives matter, it is important right now for us to be civically engaged, and it's important right now to know what this administration is doing. And it's important right now to figure out who's running in your local Senate, because in 2022 we need a few more Senate seats. Everything can't be decided just by 2 particular Democrats who choose to do nothing. We can do something. We did it before, we can do it again. Georgia was never supposed to flip blue, but it did. So, and a lot of people are paying attention to this. So I want y'all to pay attention to this redistricting that's happening in this voter suppression tactic. So make sure that you guys stay vigilant. Make sure you guys look up your candidates in your local elections. Make sure that you guys are paying attention. And I pray to God that I did a decent job in educating you guys and telling you my own personal story. And I hope you guys follow me again on Too Raw Too Real on all platforms. That's on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and then you can also follow me on YouTube. Y'all have a great night, you guys. And I hope you guys enjoy the summit.